Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind is, you might have a minor refractive error. So you might have some mild myopia or short sight. You might have some mild astigmatism, or if you're in your sort of 40s and 50s and beyond, you might have some mild long-sightedness that's initially affected your near vision, but starts to affect the distance. And you might be perfectly fine during a bright, sunny day. Everything's clear because in bright light, our pupil gets smaller. That gives us a depth of focus. There's plenty of light and contrast around, but you might not realize. You think, oh, look, I'm not so confident at driving at night, or the lights around things look really starry. And sometimes that's when a small correction can be helpful. So it just sort of pulls everything together and makes things a lot sharper. And we often get people go, oh, look, I feel like my vision's great until I wear sunglasses. When I put sunglasses on, I keep finding I want to lift them up and down. And what happens when you put a sunglass on, pupil gets bigger behind it. And so any small errors in prescription become more noticeable, and become more noticeable when you're doing something that requires a lot of concentration, like driving. So again, we might have patients who happily go without a prescription, but might find that they like having a little bit of prescription in their sunglasses, or a clear pair of glasses for driving at night. So they're probably the first things that we sort of think about, are the really basic. Let's just get you, seeing clearly as possible.
And okay, so if we're talking about sunglasses, tell me a little bit about like anti-polarization and anti-glare add-ons to your glasses.
Yeah, look, and there's lots of different sort of terms and language out there. So if we have a look at reflections, okay, so reflections off glass, reflection off the road, reflections off water, sand, those sorts of things. Reflected light becomes polarized. So the nature of that glare source, and glare is kind of almost your reaction to these reflected sources and how uncomfortable they are. And if you wear a tint that is not polarized, you simply darken the glare down. So you're just reducing the volume of light. So that is one way of making yourself more comfortable. What a polarized lens does is it actually cancels the polarization that's in the reflection. So you actually cancel out the glare. You're not just making it darker, you're canceling that reflection. And that's why people who fish and want to be able to see in the water love polarized glasses, because light hitting the water and bouncing is polarized. Sunglasses cancel the polarizing the opposite direction and effectively cancels it out. And so that can be the most comfortable way. You get a small number of people for some reason can't wear polarized glasses. It's an odd thing that I haven't gone to the trouble of working out just yet. And certainly for some people, the polarized glasses do make windscreens and on other cars look a little funny, and they don't like that. I've never seen it being an issue with the windscreens in the cars I've actually driven myself. Most car manufacturers have been careful to make sure that their LCD screens are not polarized in the wrong direction, because computer screens and phones and anything that's an LCD screen is naturally polarized as well. So they need to make sure that they're all sitting in the right direction. I think there is a famous story of a model of Australian-made Ford car, might be a Falcon or a Fairlane. It's the first LCD model, and they weren't careful enough, and so you could not wear polarized glasses and drive that car.
That would be a problem.
And then we get into what sort of other, so you've got sunglasses, tints, polarization. You can get tints that change. So people might be aware of, it's a bit like they call the technical name for is photochromatic. So you go out in the sun, the UV light activates a chemical in the lens which makes it go dark. The most popular brand that everyone talks about is Transitions, and it's almost become a bit like how vacuum cleaning was called hoovering. One of the big brands becomes the verb. It's a bit like Googling. So, and Transitions, because they need light to activate, traditionally don't work so well in the car. So you walk in the sun, they go dark. You walk inside, they go light again. But because of the absence of UV in the car, because it's blocked by your windscreen, even if it's not a tinted windscreen, you're getting some blocking of the UV. They don't activate as much. But they've got around that by creating a different version that you can get called an extra active, which will activate in the car and go a medium tint in the car. You can even get one that's clear, almost clear, and actually polarizes as a dark. So there's lots of choices there. So if you've got a prescription and you're wanting a sort of a pair of glasses to try and be a jack of all trades, then some of these new transition tints and applications to lenses can be something to consider.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't know that, because that's one of I thought it was a bit of a catch-22, because I was hoping to get some transition glasses, but I thought, well, if I'm driving, it's not really going to help me that much. But listening to what you just said, that maybe solves that problem.
Yeah, and look, I've got a lot of my staff use the extra active transitions and actually have them in the glasses that they wear at work. And I almost forget that they're wearing them because the old extra active used to be a visible tint when they were deactivated inside. So, it wasn't a lot of people who went for that, but the new ones are almost clear. There's the slightest hint of a tint, but not enough to really be conscious of. And so, the product's really improved in the last few years.
Just before we move on, so with anti-polarized lenses, is that something that we can get into regular spectacles, not just sunglasses? I mean, is there like a coating that you can put into regular glasses that are also going to cut out that glare?
So if we go coatings first, so you can get an anti-glare coating. It's not polarizing. It just takes the white reflection off your lens. Okay. And so they're great for night driving. Well, look, I think every pair of glasses, unless you've got a very good reason, should really have an anti-reflection coating on it. In places like Germany and Japan that only talk about it, it's just part of the lens. I think in Australia, because our conditions are a lot more harsh, the early versions of anti-reflection coatings were harder to keep clean. They didn't last as well in our heat. But unless you've got a very good reason, an anti-reflection coating takes the white reflection off your lens, so they're clearer to look through, especially if you've got reflections coming from behind, but even just the internal reflection in the lens can be cancelled down. So you've got that kind of coating. You've got the transition tint. So if we are making up a pair of glasses, the lab has to there's a whole process of that transition has to make sure that a lens manufacturer is making the lens with their product in it according to a certain standard. So you have to order the lens right from the beginning as a transition lens before it's made. So that's done at the lab level. And like I said, we've got just a tint. You can get extra active, you can get polarized, and you can get some different colors on the brand. If you want just a tinted pair of prescription glasses, then that's where we take a prescription lens and they dip it in a dye. So they actually treat the lens. That's a surface coloring that's applied to the lens. But if we want polarized, it's a bit like transitions, we have to order it as the lab has to use a blank that already has the polarizing film that's embedded inside the lens. So it's actually a film that's embedded.
And just to finish this off, I guess, is with if you do have any sort of glasses with coatings on them, whether that be anti-glare or whatever, I think you have to be a little bit careful about leaving them in hot cars, don't you? Like if I remember correctly, like leaving your glasses in very hot environments can really sort of damage and degrade that feature.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of, and people don't realize that there are some areas in your car that hit 60, 70 degrees, particularly in Australian summer. So an anti-reflection coating is also called a multi-coating. And these things are microns in thickness. So they're really, really thin layers, but they can be made up of 9, 10, 11 layers. And the tricky part with the technology behind anti-reflection coatings is if you have one type of plastic, you work out a great anti-reflection coating put on. Now, the lens plastic itself expands and contracts at a different rate to every single layer in that coating. So a coating that works for a 1.5 plastic is different to a coating that works for a 1.6 that's different to a 1.67 that's different. And these are all the different indexes. So there's quite a lot of research technology that goes into having them all tolerate some expansion and contraction within a certain sort of temperature range. As soon as you exceed that, then that's when it's a bit like you get this crazing. That's the pulling apart, breaking of it. It's a bit like watching your paint start to craze and crack. Once it gets old, loses that flexibility.
All right, one more question about lenses, and that is multifocal or progressive lenses. So, who would they be a good option for, and how can we sort of make sure that they're set up correctly for driving?
Look, the number one demographic who might use a progressive lens is people in their 40s and 50s who are losing that focusing flexibility near. And what a multifocal allows you to do is have the top portion of the lens set at your distance prescription, down the bottom is reading, and sort of in between is a gradual increase till you get to the reading part. So theoretically, you should be able to find focus in any part of the lens. So the bottom for up close, the middle part for computer screens, and then further away. But they're all a bit of a compromise because we're trying to get them to do lots of different things. And so there's a little bit of swim and distortion in the peripheral part of the lens. And with the technology nowadays, to bring up the AI thing, there's a lot of that sort of stuff being used to be able to really custom design lenses for different individuals. But on a basic level, we look at outdoor active progressives, we look at more sort of all-round progressives, and then we look at more the office or indoor expert kind of a lens. And what that really comes down to is trying to find the compromise for you in that amount of distortion at the side. How wide is your visual field versus how narrow is the reading area? So an active or driving lens tends to have a very, very broad, wide distance field with very little distortion at the edge. So if you're needing to sort of look out to the side without turning your head, you're not looking through that distortion. But the minus is that it has a much narrower sort of reading area, which might be fine if you just need to be glancing at things when you're pulled up. If you're a delivery driver, for an example, where you're just checking off things, you're not having to do a lot of sort of, hours of reading, you're just checking something off, and that can be quite a useful lens. And then on the other end, if you're an IT user and you're trying to get a progressive lens to do everything, we go for an expert lens. It tends to creep up a little bit in that peripheral vision, not enough to be unsafe to drive, but it does it makes the reading area and the intermediate area for computer work much easier. But some people do find that peripheral distortion is something they need to get used to. Yeah. And if you allow yourself, you'll start to make small compensatory head movements for those zones that might be a little less clear.